Here's a listing of some steps that you will take while you are setting up AAA. The first is to add usernames and passwords to the local router database. Now, why would you do this? Well, AAA does not require a Radius server or a TACACS Plus server. So you could use AAA with just local usernames and passwords stored on the router. However, if you are using Radius or TACACS Plus for the authentication purposes, you should still have at least one username and password in the local router database. And why is that? Well, for fallback purposes. If those Radius servers or TACACS Plus servers are no longer available because there's an outage or the servers went up in smoke, what do you have to authenticate to your devices? Well, nothing now. So you better have at least one username and password in the local router database that is used for emergency purposes. And then when you craft your method list, you'll make sure that the primary authentication or method in the method list is going to be the Radius servers or TACACS Plus servers. And then method number 2, the fallback method, is going to be the local username and password database. In order to use AAA, though, you have to have AAA enabled globally on the router. If for some reason you're starting to type in AAA commands and they're not being taken or accepted by the router, it's because you probably forgot to turn on AAA. You'll configure your authentication policies using your method lists. If you need authorization or accounting, you'll do so as well. We won't do that here. We'll just do authentication here. And then through various show commands, you can confirm and troubleshoot your AAA configuration. To enable AAA on your router, you'll go into global configuration mode and type in the AAA new model command. So for some reason, you're typing in AAA commands in global configuration mode and they're not working. For example, you type in AAA authentication and you create a method list and it's not accepted. It might be because you have not turned on AAA yet with the AAA new model command. So this is mandatory. It's a must when using AAA. Now remember that AAA does not require an external server for authentication purposes. So you can use the username and password database that is local on the router. And you would populate this database with the username password command. However, the password command is not secure enough. It stores all the passwords in plain text in the running config. So you should really consider nowadays using the username secret command. Because with the secret command, the passwords are going to be hashed in the database, hashed within the running config. Now, if you are using external servers as your primary method, you're going to have some type of method list set up, AAA, authentication, and then it's going to define login as the authentication you're setting up, and then your method list and the group of the TACACS Plus server. Well, you need to make sure that you specify that if those servers aren't available, that the local username and password database is going to be utilized. So just because you have usernames and passwords in the database doesn't mean they're going to be used unless you actually specify it in the method list command when you're setting up AAA authentication with external servers and method lists. However, let's say you're not using your external servers. You don't have TACACS Plus servers or Radius servers. How do you make sure that your VTY lines and your console lines use the local username and password database? Well, when you're setting up your VTY lines, your console line, you will use the command login local. If you just specify login, then it uses the line password if it exists. However, by saying login local, it's going to use the local username and password database. But let's set up a Radius server right now. We can see here that in global configuration mode, we're typing in Radius server, and we're giving the particular server a name. So this is some server we have within our organization, and we're going to name it. And then we set up the IP address. So this is how the router is going to identify that particular server. It's going to identify by name, and it's going to connect to it via this particular IPv4 address or host name. And then we can also specify the authentication port number, the accounting port number, and so on and so forth. In addition to that, the Radius server is going to have some type of key string for authentication purposes between the router and the server. And that key string is going to have to match between the two devices. We also are going to have to set up groups. So we take our servers and we put them into groups on our routers. So we have our AAA group, and it's a group of Radius servers. and we give that group a name. And then we simply say which servers are part of this group. So right now our server name is the name that matches with the name we set up here. And then we create our method list, and our method list here is AAA Authentication Login. So we're setting this up for our VTY lines and our console lines. And regardless of whether we use a default method list or whether we create our own user-defined method list, we are going to specify group and then specify the group of radius servers. So there could be one server in this group or 10 servers in this group. In this case, there's only one. So you specify the group, and the group name is listed. And then our second method is local. So if the radius server is not available, then we are going to use the local username and password database for fallback purposes. What about TACACS? Well, TACACS is very similar. Let's set up a TACACS server on the router. So the router we have configured with the command TACACS server and give it a name. And then we say that particular TACACS server is reachable at this particular IPv4 address. This is the port number, and this is our key string to authenticate the router with that particular external server. And then we set up a group that we're going to put TACACS servers into. In this case, this TACACS Plus is going to have a certain group name. And then the server that we just created up here is going to be placed into this particular group. And then when we set up our authentication method list, AAA Authentication Login, instead of saying group and then giving it the radius server's group name, we simply just give it the TACACS Plus server's group name. So there's no difference with this command right here. It's the exact same, except this variable, the group name, instead of it being the radius server's group name, is now the TACACS Plus server's group name. And don't forget about our second method. So group is our first method, and our second method is going to be local, the local username and password database for fallback purposes.